The defense table is empty. Not one lawyer. Not one folder. Just Walter Briggs, sitting alone in a $3,000 suit that suddenly feels like a costume. 40 years of work, 3 towers with his name carved into the lobby stone. Gone, or about to be gone, in the next 60 seconds. His own attorney quit the night before, left a resignation letter in a white envelope like flowers at a funeral. The opposing lawyer stands, smooth and smiling, already tasting the win. Should have taken the settlement, old man, she says. I'll keep your name in the lobby, as a souvenir. Walter doesn't answer. He's not fighting for himself anymore. That fight ended days ago. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom slam open. Every head turns. A young man in a sharp suit walks in like the floor belongs to him. Dad, I'm here. Walter told him not to come. Walter lied to keep him away. And in his hand is a single leather case that's about to turn a guaranteed conviction into handcuffs for someone else. Isaiah. Walter's voice breaks clean in half on the second syllable. I told you not to come. You also told me family shows up. Isaiah doesn't slow his stride. Pick one. Judge Constance Marsh looks up over the rim of her glasses, unbothered in the specific way only 40 years on the bench can make a person. She has seen theater walk into her courtroom before. She has also seen the real thing arrive looking exactly like theater. And some deep, careful part of her is already sorting this into the second pile. And who is this? She asks, though her tone suggests she already suspects the answer. I'm his son, Your Honor, Isaiah says, and I'm entering an appearance for the defense. Camille Ashford rises to her feet with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a woman who has never once lost a case she cared enough to remember. She is wearing green, the color she wears on days she intends to win. And she looks at Isaiah the way a surgeon looks at an unscheduled interruption. Your Honor, this is theater. Final arguments are not the moment to parachute in some. Some what? Isaiah asks, mild as still water. A relative? A party is entitled to representation, Miss Ashford. And prejudice runs to the side, surprised by evidence, not the side surprised by competence. A murmur moves through the gallery. In the back row, a woman named Delia Osei presses both hands flat against her knees to keep them from shaking, because she is the only other person in that room who knows exactly what is inside that leather case, and exactly how little sleep it cost to get it there. To understand what just walked through those doors, you have to go back. Not months. 17 years. On a December night, so cold, the gas station lights buzzed like they were shivering too. A construction foreman named Walter Briggs pulled his truck over on the edge of the city and saw a boy sitting alone by the ice machine. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. No coat worth the name. A backpack that looked like it held everything he owned, because it did. He wasn't crying. That was the detail that undid Walter completely. More than the cold, more than the hour. The boy had already learned, somewhere along the way, that crying didn't bring anybody. Walter didn't ask questions from a standing height. Some men would have. Walter crouched down instead, knees cracking on the cold concrete, so the two of them were the same size, and he asked the only question that seemed to matter that night. What's your name, son? Isaiah, the boy whispered, like the word cost him something to hand over. That's a strong name. Walter tried a smile that felt clumsy on his own face. You hungry? He drove Isaiah to an all-night diner and didn't check his watch once. Over pancakes the boy ate like he wasn't sure anyone would let him finish the plate. Walter learned that Isaiah's mother had passed that autumn, that a foster placement waited across the county, and that the last van had simply left without him. Walter Briggs had built his own company out of a rusted toolbox and a stubborn refusal to quit. But sitting in that diner booth, he understood, with a clarity that frightened him a little, that none of the towers he'd built would ever matter half as much as whatever happened in the next few months. The paperwork took the better part of a year. Walter filled out every form himself, sat through every home inspection with his jaw tight and his patience tighter, terrified of letting anyone see how badly he wanted this to work. When Isaiah came home for good the following autumn, Walter painted the guest room the exact shade of blue the boy pointed to in the hardware store, and didn't say one word about the cost of doing it twice, because the first coat wasn't quite right. He learned to help with a 9-year-old's homework badly, and then less badly. He learned that Isaiah flinched at raised voices, and Walter, a man who had spent 30 years shouting over jackhammers for a living, retrained his own voice to be softer in his house than anywhere else on earth. He raised the boy on one rule, the same rule his own father had handed him on a job site 3 decades earlier. Your word is the only thing you actually own. Guard it like your life depends on it, because eventually it will. At 15, Isaiah told his father he wanted to study business and law. Not because he loved either subject, he admitted, but because he was tired of watching people with money push around people who had none. Walter sat in the front row of every debate final after that, a big man in work boots, crying without an ounce of shame in a room full of blazers, and never once told his son the other reason he was proud, that the boy had chosen, on his own, to spend his life doing to bullies exactly what nobody had been able to do for either of them. Once, 11 years ago, Preston Wade walked into that story, and everything after that walked a little closer to this courtroom. Wade was polished in a way Walter had never pretended to be. An Ivy League pedigree, tailored suits, a handshake that lingered half a second past comfortable. He came in on the finance side of Briggs Construction, calling Walter sir, with just enough warmth in his voice that it took the old man 3 full years to notice the warmth never once reached his eyes. What Walter didn't know, what nobody at the company knew, was that Preston Wade had grown up 2 exits down the highway from the lot where the company's very first office trailer used to sit. His father had worked a Briggs crew once, decades earlier, before Walter fired him off a foundation pour that had been cutting corners badly enough to get somebody killed. Wade had grown up listening to his father curse the name Briggs over dinner every night for years. He had built an entire career, quietly and patiently, aimed at exactly one door, and he had never told a single person that, not even the lawyer sitting beside him now. By the time Isaiah left for college, Wade had made himself indispensable to Briggs Construction, restructuring the company's debt, courting new investors, learning where every document in the building lived, and, more usefully, learning exactly where the old man's trust had no lock on it at all. 6 months before this courtroom, Wade filed suit, claiming the proprietary building system that had made all 3 of Walter's towers possible had actually been his own invention, developed quietly on his own time, and stolen from him the moment it became profitable. He produced a partnership agreement to prove it. He produced Walter's signature at the bottom of the page. Walter swore on his late wife's memory that he had never signed it. It didn't matter. It looked exactly like his hand. "Mr. Briggs," Camille Ashford had said 2 days earlier, holding the forged agreement high enough for the whole jury to study it, "is this your signature?" Walter looked at it for a long time. That was the terrible genius of the thing. Someone had built it, letter by letter, out of 100 real signatures, until even Walter himself could find no fault in the shape of it. "It looks like my signature," he said slowly, "but I never signed that document. You built an empire, sir, and you can't keep track of what you sign? I'm telling you I didn't sign that paper." "Or is it," Ashford said, turning toward the jury with a small, sorrowful smile, "that you sign a great many things, Mr. Briggs, and remember only the ones that happen to be convenient?" Walter's own attorney rose to object, then sat back down without finishing the sentence, a man who had already spent the last of whatever fight he had left. That night, the attorney packed his briefcase, left a resignation letter on the defense table like flowers laid at a funeral, and cited irreconcilable differences, which is what lawyers say when the real difference is that they have simply stopped believing they can win. Walter had sat alone the next morning, watching 40 years of honest work slide toward a man who was calling him a thief in a suit that cost more than Walter's very first house. What Preston Wade did not know, could not have known, was that 3,000 miles away, The boy from the curb had gotten a phone call 2 nights earlier from an old friend still working inside the company. Delia Osei had worked the front desk of Briggs Construction for 19 years. She still carried the keys to the old maintenance office out of habit more than duty. The way people do when a place has quietly become half their life. "Isaiah," she said, her voice shaking down a bad connection. "I think I found something. I don't know if it means anything yet, but I think you need to hear it before this goes any further." Isaiah had been finishing his own trial when the call came through, a federal fraud case he had just won. The kind of case that either ends a career or starts one properly. He almost let it ring through to voicemail. He didn't. "Delia, slow down. What did you find?" "The old intercom system," she said. "From before they redid the offices years back. Nobody ever pulled the hard drives when they upgraded the phones. They just boxed the whole unit and stuck it down in basement storage. I was digging around for holiday decorations of all things. And there it was. Isaiah. It still has recordings on it. Years of them. Office to office. Your daddy had that whole system installed for safety after that break-in back in '09, and then everybody just forgot it was still running." Isaiah felt something inside his chest go very still and very focused. The particular calm that arrives right before a case reveals itself. "Delia. Does it cover Wade's office?" A long pause on the line. "It covers everybody's office, baby." Nobody ever told him it. Kept listening. Isaiah was on a plane within the hour, breaking a promise to himself that he would stay out of this, breaking a promise to his father that he'd keep his distance, because some promises exist purely to be broken in service of a bigger one. He didn't sleep on that flight. He read the entire case file front to back twice, hunting less for what was written down than for what had been quietly left out. The forged partnership agreement. The design files Wade claimed as his own invention. Somewhere in the middle of the second pass, Isaiah noticed a detail everyone else had missed entirely. A date stamp on one of Wade's early internal emails that didn't line up with the timeline Wade had sworn to under oath. Off by exactly 11 days. It was small. It was the kind of thing juries glaze right over. It was also exactly the kind of thing Isaiah had built an entire career on, refusing to let anyone glaze over. He landed and drove straight to Delia's house instead of a hotel, and the two of them spent the whole night in her garage, running 19-year-old recordings through equipment so old it hummed like a tired refrigerator. Most of it was nothing. Weather complaints, lunch orders debated at length, a badly sung birthday song for a man named Frank who probably didn't work there anymore. And then, at 2:47 in the morning, they found 11 minutes that changed everything Isaiah thought he understood about the man suing his father. "You should call this in," Delia said quietly, watching Isaiah's face while the recording played through a second time. Isaiah didn't answer right away. He was thinking about a courtroom 400 miles east, and a father who had told him not to come, and a promise about showing up that Isaiah intended to keep, whether Walter liked it or not. "No," he said finally. "I'm going to walk it in myself." He caught the first flight out at dawn, with the leather case pressed flat against his chest the entire way, rehearsing what he'd say, running back through everything Walter had ever taught him about building something solid, one honest piece at a time. He landed with 40 minutes to spare, and when the cab line looked too long and the rain looked like it might actually cost him the case, he ran the last 6 blocks on foot, soaked through by the time he reached the courthouse steps. He came through those doors at a dead sprint, right as the bailiff called the room to order for final arguments. "Dad, I'm here." Judge Marsh studies the notice of appearance her clerk has just passed up, then looks over her glasses at Camille Ashford. "Counsel appears to have properly filed at 8 o'clock this morning, Miss Ashford. Your objection." "This is a stunt, Your Honor. His own attorney abandoned this case last night, precisely because there is nothing left to argue." "There's plenty left to argue," Isaiah says, and something in the flatness of his voice makes even Preston Wade, sitting composed and grave beside his lawyer, glance up for the first time all morning. "I have exhibits already filed with the clerk. time-stamped before I walked into this room. The court can verify that in 90 seconds. If they're what I say they are, Your Honor, you'll want them in the record before you rule. If they're not, Miss Ashford is welcome to laugh me straight out of this building." Judge Marsh is quiet for a long moment. Careful people, Walter has always said, can smell it when the truth walks into a room. "I'll allow a limited presentation," she says finally. "Mr. Briggs, this had better not be theater." "It isn't theater, Your Honor," Isaiah says, setting the leather case down on the defense table and popping the brass latches with a click that echoes off the marble like a small gavel of its own. "It's a recording, and recordings, unlike memory, don't change shape depending on who's asking the question." Preston Wade's composure cracks, just slightly, at the corner of his mouth. For the first time in 3 days of trial, he doesn't yet know exactly what's on that recording. But some old guilty part of him already suspects. Leans forward half an inch, her pen frozen over her legal pad, because she has spent 15 years reading rooms for a living. And this room has just changed temperature in a way she cannot yet explain to herself. At the defense table, Walter Briggs reaches out and closes one hand over his son's wrist, not to stop him, but because he needs, for just 1 second, to feel that this is real, that the boy from the freezing curb grew into a man who came home at exactly the right hour, carrying exactly the right thing. "Isaiah," he says quietly, so quietly only his son can hear it. "What's on that recording?" Isaiah doesn't look away from the judge. "The truth, Dad," finally, in his own voice. Somewhere in the second row, Delia Osei exhales for what feels like the first time in 19 hours and folds her hands in her lap and waits. Judge Marsh nods once toward the bailiff. "Play it for the court." The room goes very still, the particular stillness of 100 people all holding the same breath at once, waiting for a recording almost 2 decades old to finally say out loud what it has been quietly holding on to the entire time. Camille Ashford rises halfway out of her chair, one hand lifted as if she might still stop what's coming through sheer force of objection. "Your Honor, we haven't had opportunity to review the chain of custody on this. You'll have your chance to cross-examine the recording's authenticity, counsel," Judge Marsh says without looking up. "Sit down." She sits. It is the first order she has followed all morning without an argument attached to it, and somewhere in the gallery, a retired foreman named Otis Grant, who rode Walter's very first crew 30 years ago, presses his cap flat against his chest and goes still. The way people go still in the last second before a church bell rings. The bailiff sets a small speaker on the evidence table. The cable is old, spliced twice, held together with electrical tape that has yellowed with age. For a moment, nobody in the courtroom breathes at all. Then, very quietly, a voice from 19 years in the past begins to speak. Then, very quietly, a voice from 19 years in the past begins to speak. It isn't Walter's voice. It isn't Wade's either, not at first. It's an older man, gravel-voiced, tired, talking low into a phone that everyone in that office had long since forgotten kept listening. "He fired me off that pour like I was nothing, boy. 20 years I gave that man's father before him, and Walter Briggs cuts me loose over a foundation that never even failed. You remember that? You hear me? You remember what that man did to this family. And one day, when you're inside that company, you make him pay for it. Every dollar, every brick." The recording hisses, crackles, and a second voice answers, younger, careful, already practicing the tone he'd wear for the next 11 years. "I hear you, Dad. I won't forget." The courtroom doesn't move. Somewhere behind the defense table, Otis Grant lets out a breath that sounds almost like a groan, low and old, a sound that belongs more to a funeral than a courtroom. Preston Wade's face has gone the specific gray of a man watching a floor he built his whole life on turn to water beneath him. "Objection," Camille Ashford says. But there's no polish left in it now, just the reflex of a lawyer whose hand is shaking. "Foundation, Your Honor." "Authentication. The recording is a business record from the company's own retained system, Miss Ashford," Isaiah says calmly. Custodian is available by video. I'd be happy to have her explain under oath exactly how a 15-year-old intercom line ended up documenting the plaintiff promising his father, on tape, that he would spend his career punishing my client for something that happened before Mr. Wade was even born. That is not proof of forgery, Ashford says, recovering half a step. A grudge is not a crime, counsel. You're right, Isaiah says. A grudge isn't a crime, but it explains motive, Your Honor, and motive is exactly what this courtroom has been missing for 3 days. Now let's talk about opportunity. He turns toward Wade directly for the first time since walking through those doors, and something in his tone shifts from courtroom procedure into something quieter and far more personal. Mr. Wade, you testified under oath that you developed the Briggs building system independently, on your own time, during your first 2 years of employment. Is that still your testimony? Wade's attorney half rises. Your Honor, this is argumentative. It's cross-examination, Miss Ashford, and your client is still under oath from Monday, Judge Marsh says. Answer the question, Mr. Wade. Wade's throat works once. That was my testimony, yes. Then perhaps you can explain, Isaiah says, why the recording the court just heard, dated 3 years ago, has you rehearsing a partnership agreement dated 11 years back, before you'd even had the idea you now claim to have invented independently. Explain to me how a man backdates a document to prove he invented something he hadn't invented yet. Wade says nothing. The silence stretches long enough that even Judge Marsh stops writing. I don't need an answer, Your Honor, Isaiah says finally, turning back to the bench. The recording already gave me one. He clicks to the next exhibit. A second recording, dated far more recently, less than 3 years old, pulled from the same forgotten hard drive. This one is Wade's own voice, alone in his office late at night, rehearsing something out loud the way people do when they think no one on earth can hear them. Partnership agreement, Wade's recorded voice says, flat and businesslike, testing the words. Dated 11 years back. Signature matches the file samples, design specs, backdated, cross-reference the invoice numbers before Friday. A long pause on the recording. Then, quieter, almost to himself. 20 years, old man. You're going to pay every one of them back. The silence that follows in the courtroom afterward is not the silence of people processing information. It's the silence of people watching a lie finish dying in real time. Judge Marsh looks over her glasses at Preston Wade, who has not moved in almost a full minute. Mr. Wade, do you have anything you'd like your counsel to say on your behalf? Wade doesn't answer. His jaw works once, twice, like he's chewing on 11 years of a story that no longer fits in his mouth. Camille Ashford turns to him, her voice dropped low enough that only the front 2 rows can hear it. Tell me that isn't your voice. Wade says nothing at all, which is its own kind of answer. It's at that exact moment, with the room still ringing from what it just heard, that Walter Briggs presses one hand flat against his chest and goes very quiet in his seat. Isaiah feels it before he sees it, the particular stillness of his father beside him. Wrong in a way 30 years of watching Walter work job sites has taught him to recognize instantly. Dad? Walter's face has gone pale, a thin sheen of sweat breaking along his hairline. I'm all right, he says, though his voice doesn't sound all right at all. Just need a... He doesn't finish the sentence. His hand tightens against his chest, and he leans hard against the table, and for one terrible second, the entire courtroom holds a completely different kind of breath than it held 30 seconds earlier. Dad! Isaiah is out of his chair, catching his father before Walter can slide all the way to the floor. And the courtroom that had just watched a case collapse now watches something far more frightening. A man who built 3 towers with his bare hands, folding under the weight of finally being believed. Someone call for paramedics, Judge Marsh says, already on her feet. All the careful formality of the bench gone in an instant, because underneath the robe she has spent 40 years being a person first. Now, the next several minutes move the way emergencies always move. Too fast to remember clearly, and too slow to survive comfortably. Isaiah kneels on the courtroom floor with his father's head in his lap. One hand pressed to Walter's chest, counting the rise and fall of it out loud, like counting might keep it steady through sheer stubbornness. "Stay with me," Isaiah says, low, urgent, all the courtroom composure gone out of his voice now, replaced by something rawer and much older. The voice of a 9-year-old boy who once sat on a curb and learned that nobody was coming, now refusing to believe that could ever be true again. "You hear me? You don't get to leave in the middle of this, not after everything. Stay with me." "I'm not going anywhere," Walter manages, his hand finding his son's wrist and gripping it the way he gripped it in the diner 19 years ago. Except now it's Isaiah holding steady and Walter holding on. "Told you, best deal I ever made, not walking out on it now." The paramedics arrive in under 6 minutes. It feels like 60. They stabilize him on the courtroom floor, oxygen mask fogging with every breath, and wheel him out past a gallery of his own employees standing in stunned silence, past Otis Grant with his cap pressed to his chest and tears running freely down a face that hasn't cried in decades, past Delia Osei gripping the back of a bench so hard her knuckles have gone white. Isaiah rides in the ambulance. He doesn't let go of his father's hand the entire way. 3 hours later, in a hospital room that smells like antiseptic and quiet relief, a cardiologist named Dr. Renata Cole delivers the news with the practiced calm of someone who has learned exactly how much hope to offer at once. "It was a stress-induced episode, not a heart attack," she says. "His heart is strong, Mr. Briggs. Stronger than a man his age has any right to expect, frankly. But stress like the kind you've been under doesn't ask permission before it takes a toll. He needs rest, real rest, not the kind where he keeps one eye on a courtroom." "He's not going to like that," Isaiah says, and for the first time in 3 exhausting days, something close to a real smile crosses his face. "He doesn't have to like it," Dr. Cole says. "He just has to do it." She steps out to update the chart, and for a moment the room holds only the steady beep of the monitor and the sound of Walter breathing, easier now than it was on that courtroom floor. Isaiah pulls a chair up beside the bed and doesn't let go of his father's hand, the way he didn't let go of it in the ambulance, the way he hasn't really let go of it, in one form or another, since he was 9 years old. Walter, propped up in the hospital bed looking smaller than Isaiah has ever seen him, and somehow no less stubborn for it, waves a hand weakly toward his son. "Don't you dare let that recording go to waste on my account. Finish it. Dad, finish it, Isaiah." Walter's voice cracks, not from weakness this time, but from something fuller. "You came home to do a job. I've watched you do hard things your whole life. Don't stop now because an old man's heart decided to have an opinion at a bad time." Isaiah looks at his father for a long moment, at the 4 line, and the pale hospital light, and the stubborn set of a jaw he has known since he was 9 years old, and understands, the way he has always understood the important things about this man, that Walter Briggs would rather die finishing what he started than live having quit early. "Okay," Isaiah says quietly. "Okay, I'll finish it, but you're staying right here." "Wouldn't dream of leaving," Walter says, already closing his eyes, exhausted in a way that looks, for the first time in days, like relief instead of defeat. Isaiah returns to the courtroom 2 days later. "Your Honor," Isaiah says, that greets him, standing feels where his father should be standing, from the one he sprinted into. "The defense would like to move for summary judgment the way in light of the evidence already entered. Every employee who could get the afternoon off refer this matter to the district attorney's office until the bailiff has to bring in extra chairs." Judge Marsh, Camille Ashford, sits alone at the plaintiff's table. Then Preston Wade sits beside her, whose composure has entirely dissolved into something smaller and much more human. It looks less like a legal partnership watching every excuse and more like he's built for himself waiting run out of road at the same verdict. "Mr. Wade, 2 very different problems. Is there anything you would like to say before I rule?" For a long moment, nobody in the courtroom breathes. Then Preston Wade does something nobody expects. He stands, slowly, and looks not at the judge, not at Isaiah, but directly at the empty chair where Walter Briggs should have been sitting. "My father spent his whole life angry at a man who fired him for a mistake that could have gotten somebody killed," Wade says, his voice thin, stripped of every ounce of the polish it carried 3 days ago. I grew up eating that anger for breakfast until I couldn't tell it apart from my own. I told myself I was owed something. I told myself for 11 years. He stops. Swallows hard. I was wrong. I was wrong a long time before I ever forged a single page. The gallery stays silent, but it is a different silence than before. Less like judgment and more like witnessing something finally break open the right way. Judge Marsh studies him a moment longer, then turns back to her bench. The court finds for the defendant on all counts. This matter is referred immediately to the district attorney's office for prosecution of perjury and fraud upon the court. Mr. Wade, Miss Ashford, I'd strongly recommend retaining separate counsel from this point forward. The gavel comes down once, and the gallery, 40 years of loyal Briggs employees rising together in total silence, exactly as Judge Marsh had asked of them, stands as one. A silent room full of standing people, Isaiah thinks, remembering something his father used to say, is louder than any cheer ever recorded. Walter comes home from the hospital 8 days later to find the guest room repainted. At Isaiah's quiet request, the exact shade of blue it was the very first year he lived there, a small private joke between a father and son that nobody else in the house understands and neither of them explains. Preston Wade pleads guilty 3 months later, testifies against nobody but himself, and receives a sentence that includes real prison time and, more unusually, a court-ordered restitution plan that Walter, against the advice of nearly everyone who loves him, quietly reduces once he learns Wade's elderly father is still alive and has nowhere else to go. Why? Isaiah asks him one evening, the two of them on the porch, with 2 mugs of coffee going cold between them. Would you do him any favors after everything? Walter is quiet for a long moment, watching the last of the light go gold over the yard. Because somebody did me a favor once, on a curb, in December, when he had every reason not to bother, he says finally. And I decided a long time ago I'd rather be the kind of man who keeps doing that, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Camille Ashford is disbarred within the year. The transcript of Wade's confession read aloud in a disciplinary hearing that does not find her role in it the least bit charming. She leaves the state not long after. Nobody in the Briggs group misses the sound of her name. Isaiah doesn't go back to federal prosecution. He tells his father the decision over dinner one night, a little nervously, the way a grown man still sometimes braces for his father's opinion even when he already knows what it will be. I want to open my own practice, he says. Small, nothing like the firms that used to court me. I want to take the cases nobody else will. The small contractors getting squeezed by people exactly like Wade. Families losing homes to paperwork nobody explained to them properly. People who never had someone crouch down to their level and ask their name. Walter doesn't say anything for a moment. Then he reaches across the table and grips his son's hand the way he did in a hospital bed, the way he did on a courtroom floor, the way he did 19 years ago in a diner booth over a plate of pancakes. Good, he says, and his voice is thick. The world needs more people who make bullies nervous. Isaiah names the practice after his mother, a woman he never met but has heard about his whole life in Walter's stories. The woman who told a heartbroken young man to build something that outlasts him. On the day the sign goes up outside a small office, 2 blocks from the first job site Walter ever ran, Walter stands across the street with his hands in his pockets, crying without an ounce of shame, the way he has since Isaiah was 15 years old and told him what he wanted to be. Delia Osei retires from the front desk the following spring, but not before Walter creates a position just for her. Director of Company Archives, a title everyone privately understands exists, mostly so the woman who kept an old intercom hard drive, out of pure sentimentality, never has to leave the building she loves. Otis Grant, the retired foreman who rode Walter's very first crew, is given a seat on the company's board at 81 years old, mostly so he can tell the story of that courtroom to every new hire who joins, embellishing it a little more each year, in a way nobody has the heart to correct. A year to the day after the verdict, on a cold December evening, A car pulls up outside a gas station on the edge of the city. Isaiah gets out first, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, and lowers himself onto the curb by the ice machine, the way he has every year since he was 9 years old. Walter follows more slowly than he used to, easing himself down beside his son, with a small groan and a joke about his knees that makes Isaiah laugh out loud into the cold air. They sit there together the way they always do, drinking hot chocolate, watching their breath fog in the streetlight, not saying very much at all, because the people who love you most are the ones you can be quiet next to. "Best deal I ever made," Walter says finally, bumping his cup gently against his son's. Isaiah leans his head against his father's shoulder, the way he has since he was 9 years old, and doesn't correct him, because for once, in his long and careful and entirely honest life, Walter Briggs has the numbers exactly right,